Hello, welcome to my video. I'm doing it in the cold and the rain today. I'm going to look particularly at, well, a few weeks ago I talked about a little bit about kenosis, the self-emptying love of God, and took it into the concept of downward mobility. And I want to flesh that out a little bit more, think about that a little bit. One thing Richard Rohr talks about, particularly in context of kenosis, is that self-emptying love is a trait of God in Trinity. So all three elements of the Trinity empty themselves before each other, and in that love, that spills out into creation, which kind of like picks up on the idea of the Greek word perichoresis, which is the divine dance, a circle dance that spills out into creation. And also from that, I think that self-emptying love spills out into incarnation, Christ being sent, missio, into the world by God, missio Dei. And so so what does this look like? What does that mean? What does any of that mean? Well, downward mobility is hugely counter-cultural. And our culture, what does our culture consist of? Well, actually, sadly, our culture is consumeristic. We are a consumer culture. We are a growth culture, which is why this time is so interesting, because we can't grow like we normally do, because growth seems to have been put on hold. We've got a Sabbath, a global Sabbath, a pause. But our culture is this consumer culture, and this consumer culture is based on transactional living. You purchase and you receive, and actually that transactional thinking impacts our understanding of the cross. We've talked about the atonement, the at-one-ment, how and actually what we see then is the cross is a transaction. God gives his son and we get forgiven. There's a transactional there. It meets into our prayer life. We're not the servants and God's the master, but God is like a celestial genie, and we give him our prayers, offer him stuff, and he in return gives us the answers to our prayers. So there's that. There's also an element of transaction in sacrifice, even, which is that the whole problem that the Israelites face, which is what the whole problem with fasting in Isaiah is. They fasted and they expected God to do. It was a transactional one. So even in sacrificial language, which I talked about yesterday, we can bring in an aspect of transaction. Transaction can give into our giving, live into our giving. So, we give because we have received. And if we are not receiving, then we cease giving. It can affect our understanding of what we do for church. Rather than seeing church as a place we go to serve, we go to receive, and we pay back in maybe the offering basket, or indeed just our presence. And that consumer culture, of course, breeds into the life of the church, whereby we expect the services to be delivered to our requirements, which is why I talked yesterday about sacrifice of praise, actually going to church not because it meets our need, but because actually we go to gather to celebrate the service that we've done in the week for God. But actually downward mobility defeats transactionalism, because transactionalism can't understand that. Another word that action can't understand is grace. Can't understand grace, because grace is free, and transactions don't get grace. Transactions don't get forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't make sense transactionally. Someone has hurt you, you forgive them. Transactions don't do those things. So downward mobility, living downwardly, living not for ourselves or what we receive or what we get, is completely counter-cultural. but actually it's completely God-centered, it's kenosis-centered, it's self-emptying love-centered, it's Trinitarian-centered, it's grace-centered, it's forgiveness-centered. And what it means is that we give up our rights, our demands, our this is what I want, and say to God, well, what do you want? Where do you want me to be? And often God points us in the direction of not a place of comfort, security, which actually most of our transactions is about security, about becoming secure or becoming comfortable. Is that downward mobility is about moving to a place of discomfort, moving a place of low security. That might mean living in an area that is hard, that is difficult, amongst people we don't necessarily understand. It might mean working in an environment that isn't about growth, endless, unnecessary, pointless growth. And that growth impacts loads of things, especially our climate and our environment, the creation that God has given us. And it might mean not going to a church because it provides for what we want, but going to a church because we can provide what it needs. So, downward mobility, kenosis, grace, forgiveness, all of these countercultural ways of living to defeat the culture of our day of growth, consumerism and transactions. And tomorrow I'm going to talk about equality.